Good morning. Today we're going to talk about 30, 60, 90 triangles. Special triangle. No real special name for this one. Like the 45, 45, 90 is also an isosceles right triangle. We don't have that situation here. Here's the relationship. And again, we got to use a variable. It doesn't really matter which variable I'll use. I think we used A the other day, so let's use B today. Okay, if the shortest side is B, and I know it's the shortest side because 30 is the smallest angle, and the smallest angle creates the smallest side, then the biggest side, the relationship will always be that the biggest side is twice as much. Okay, and the one in the middle, the long side, the long leg, this will be the short leg, this will be the long leg. In fact, let's make a note of that. This is the short leg, and this is the long leg. The long leg will be however long the short leg is times the square root of 3. Or better yet, let's see, I believe we normally write that B on the square root of 3. Yeah, that's how we normally write that. My apologies. Okay, so here's the thing. On the 45, 45, 90 triangle, you could start anywhere and go anywhere. On the 30, 60, 90, that is not true. You will never go from this point to this point directly. You will always come down through the short leg. Okay, so if you are, let's say, given the short leg and you need to go to this leg, you would multiply 2, not a square root of 2, just 2. And if you're going from the hypotenuse to the short leg, you would divide by 2. And if you were trying to get from the short leg to the long leg, short leg to the long leg, you would multiply by the square root of 3. And if you're going from the long leg to the short leg, you would divide by the square root of 3. All right, and that is it. That is what we do to find any missing part on these triangles. If we're going to start with this one, we're going to multiply by 2 to get here and multiply by the square root of 3 to get here. If we start with this one, we're going to divide by the square root of 3 to get here and then multiply by 2 to get there. If we start with this one, we divide by 2 to get here, and then we multiply by the square root of 3 to get there. So no matter which one of these you're given, you can find the other two sides, as long as you remember this little, chart here that we multiply by the square root of 3, we multiply by 2, we divide by 2, we divide by the square root of 3. That gets you everything you need to know on these. So if we take a look at our first problem here, we are starting with the short leg. This is one way they could draw a 30, 60, 90 triangle. They draw it with a 90 degree angle and a 30 angle, and you just have to know, oh, that has to be 60 then, because if you subtract those from 180, you get 60. So if I want to go from the short leg to the long leg, I need to multiply by 2. So 5 times 2 is 10. That's how long that side is. To go from the short leg to the long leg, I multiply by the square root of 3. That's what it says to do there. So I'm going to take this, and 5 times the square root of 3 is just 5 square roots of 3. That's it. And that's special right triangle for 30, 60, 90. They're not always going to be nice and easy like that, but in this case it was. On this one, we're starting here, and we're going to have to come down here first. And to get from the hypotenuse to the short leg, you divide by 2, it says. Divide by 2. So I'm going to take 8 and divide it by 2. This side is 4. All right, and then to get from here to here, I multiply by the square root of 3. So 4 times the square root of 3 is just 4 on the square root of 3. That's it. 4 square roots of 3. Okay, coming down here to this one, to get from the long leg to the short leg, we're going to divide by the square root of 3. So 8 on the square root of 3 divided by the square root of 3 We don't have to, multiply the top and the bottom by the square root of 3. We're not going to do that this time because these just cancel each other out. This side is 8. And if this side is 8, to get this side, I multiply by 2, and the answer is 16. Pardon that bell. Sorry about that. This is another way. Oh, by the way, this is another way they could show you a 30, 69. They could give you a 30 and a 60, and you got to remember, oh, that's got to be 90 then. Or they give you 60 and 90, and oh, that's got to be 30 then. Another way is an equilateral triangle. If they give you an equilateral triangle, that is code for 30, 60, 90 triangle. Because this, when I draw the dotted lines straight down like that, that creates two 30, 60, 90 triangles. So if I'm looking for this side and this side, then I use the 30, 60, 90 rule. Okay, so to get from here to here, I multiply by 2. And 5 on the square root of 3 times 2 is 10 on the square root of 3. That's it. Remember, you multiply whole number times whole number. And to get from here to this, to the long leg, short leg to long leg, you take whatever you were given and multiply it by the square root of 3. Well, 5 on the square root of 3 times the square root of 3 is 5 on the square root of 9. But we know the square root of 9. The square root of 9 is 3. And so 5 times 3, this leg here is 15. Okay, so if that's 15, that's 5 on the square root of 3, that's 10 on the square root of 3. Now you remember, you multiply 2 to get here, you multiply by the square root of 3 to get there. So you take this and multiply it by the square root of 3, which is how I got that right there, which gave me the square root of 9, which gave me 3, and 5 times 3 gave me 15. All right, on the back. Wasn't quite sure how many of these I was going to have. I figured I'd have a couple more rows, and you could put glue down here to glue it in your notes, but turns out I kind of ran out of problems. There wasn't anything else really to talk about. All right, so to get from here to here, from the hypotenuse to the short leg, you divide by 2. And 6 on the square root of 3 divided by 2, 6 divided by 2 is 3. And the square root of 3 would just carry over. So it's 3 on the square root of 3. And then to get from the short leg to the long leg, you multiply by the square root of 3. I took that right there, and I'm going to multiply it by the square root of 3. So that's going to be 3 on the square root of 9, or 3 times 3, because we know the square root of 9 is 3, and so this leg is 9. Oh, whoops. Since that's 9, that kind of automatically tells us what this is going to be and what that's going to be. Because, I mean, it would have to match. So you know what? I'm going to change that. Let's make that, instead of 9, let's make this, you know what? Let's make it 90. That makes it a little different at least. Okay, so to get from here down to here, I would divide by the square root of 3. To get from the long leg to the short leg, you divide by the square root of 3. 90 divided by the square root of 3. Well, folks, this is a radical on the bottom. We can't have a radical on the bottom and it be simplified. So this is when we have to do the whole square root of 3 over square root of 3 trick. And that would make the top 90 on the square root of 3. And that would make the bottom the square root of 9. But we know the square root of 9. The square root of 9 is 3. So now this is going to become 90 on the square root of 3 over 3. But 90 divided by 3 is 30, and the square root of 3 would just carry over. 30 on the square root of 3 is how long this side is. And then to get from the short leg to the hypotenuse, you multiply by 2. So 30 on the square root of 3 times 2 would be 60 square roots of 3. Those are kind of tougher. They are. You're going to have plenty of problems that are easier, but you're going to run into some that are tricky like that. Over here, this one's going to be a little harder for one specific reason. You'll see in a second. So to get from here to here, again, I divide by the square root of 3. So that would make this 8 divided by the square root of 3. Well, you can't have a radical on the bottom, so again, we multiply by the square root of 3 over the square root of 3. And that's going to be 8 on the square root of 3 over the square root of 9. But again, we know the square root of 9. The square root of 9 is 3. So all that changed, the square root of 9 became 3. And here's the thing, folks, we're done. Because that does not divide evenly. The whole point of using special right triangles and knowing the ratio or knowing the relationship is that you get exact answers. Okay? If you type 8 divided by 3 in the calculator, you're going to get a decimal, and it's going to be a repeating decimal. It's going to be 2.66666666, and you're going to round it to 2.67. And that right there is an approximation, and that negates the whole point of doing this. This is an exact answer. That's the answer that we want. If it reduced, you would reduce it, but you don't go ahead and type that in the calculator and get a decimal because that's not the answer we're looking for. You would then take the short leg and multiply it by 2 to get the long leg. And I don't know if you know how to multiply this kind of fraction or not, but it's not hard. If you multiply all that by 2, the only thing that's really affected is this 8, because multiplying by 2 is like multiplying by 2 over 1. And you multiply the top times the top and the bottom times the bottom. So it becomes 16 on the square root of 3 over 3. And that is how long the hypotenuse is. All right, again, no, that's kind of tricky. There's going to be a couple like that. There'll be plenty of the easy ones, but this is what's going to, kind of tell us who really gets this and who doesn't. Then we come to this one. And there's argument on one like this. Because to get from here to here, you divide by 2. So 13 divided by 2, well, we could put 6.5. And that is a terminating decimal. That is the whole exact answer. But we're trying to not mix decimals and radicals. So I'm going to tell my students to leave it like this. And that's going to be their answer. If your teacher tells you something different, then make sure you do that. But I like to have a fraction as an answer rather than a decimal when I'm going to deal with radicals. So the next thing I do is I multiply this by the square root of 3 to come over here. And 13 over 2 times the square root of 3 would just be 13 square roots of 3 over 2. All right, and that is it. That is the whole part of 30, 60, 90. There's not much more I can tell you about that. Hope this makes sense. Go back and review it again if you missed something, and we'll get some practice in tomorrow.